What the heck is going on in our country today? I'll tell you what's going on. The culture of Washington, D.C. seduces even decent people into thinking that they can use the power of the federal government to right any wrong, regulate any behavior, create any incentive, and tax any activity, whether the matter is authorized by the Constitution or not. We do not have a two-party system in this country. We have one party, the big government party. It has a Republican wing that likes war and deficits and assaults our civil liberties, and a Democratic wing that likes taxes and wealth transfer and assaults our commercial liberties. That's why we are in such trouble today, because the people we have elected in both parties to preserve the Constitution instead are shredding it. What will you do to stop them? My next guest is taking a stand to stop them. He's recently declared his candidacy for the United States Congress from Pennsylvania's 15th District. Jake Towne is running without a political party affiliation because he says he favors a restoration of the Republic and a return to the rule of law under the United States Constitution. Joining me now is Jake Towne. Jake, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
You and I discussed this at length with some fine young people who joined us when we did Freedom Watch in a special live program at Drexel University in Philadelphia. But tell those of us who are watching us now why the two-party system has failed, or stated differently, why we really have one party, a big government party, but it likes to claim it's two different parties that stand for two different sets of values.
Exactly, and what I call this system is actually a two-headed one-party system, and there's very little competition between the Democrats on the left and the Republicans on the right. And a lot of people still believe we're in a left-right spectrum, but the reality is, and this is where I'm coming in, is really where we're at is we have tyranny down here and we have liberty, and we need to go towards liberty and away from tyranny. It's not a left-right thing anymore.
Were you as scandalized as I was when, during the Bush years, when obviously there was a Republican in the White House, and at least for the first 6 years of his presidency, the Republicans controlled both houses of Congress, and yet they did things like fight wars without a declaration of war, pay for war on a credit card, which means borrowing money so future generations have to pay for it, federalized education, federalized prescription drugs for seniors, made warrantless wiretapping legal, allowed federal agents to write their own search warrants. I mean, I could go on and on and on and on and on. Things that would cause Thomas Jefferson and Barry Goldwater, the founder of the modern conservative movement in the Republican Party, to turn over in their graves. Did any of this surprise you when it happened on the Republican watch?
Well, I was actually pretty much politically apathetic up until a few years ago. I was living over in China, and I saw how the loss of liberties affect people. But in today's reality, like what you see is, you had a Democratic Congress for 2 years, but now we have a Democratic Congress and Democratic president. Nothing changes. Monetary policy doesn't change. Foreign policy doesn't change. Domestic policies just don't change.
I wasn't meaning to pick just on George W. Bush, but a person who runs as a conservative, we now know what that adjective compassionate meant. It was a code word for big government conservative. But both parties do the same thing. Is there something about people, Barry Goldwater, Ron Paul, some other members of the House of Representatives are the exception to the rule. But is there something about the government that draws only people to it who want to get in your face, who want to regulate private behavior, who want to make the government bigger rather than shrink it?
Well, what we have right now is, I would say, political entrepreneurs. All the members of Congress, most of the people that are running, with the exception of Ron Paul and a few others like you had mentioned, they view themselves really as, wanting to meddle with people's lives. And in some ways, actually, they believe that they want to improve the world, and they have their own way of believing it. But in reality, their plan will not work. It does not work. Control over people just does not.
Now, you, besides running for Congress, I think have also been involved in some kind of an internet project to keep politicians accountable to the people that send them to Washington. Tell us about that.
Sure, it's actually a novel but simple idea that I've had, and a lot of times when you hear politicians talk about transparency and accountability, they're really just buzzwords. So what I came up with, and as part of my plank, is something called our open office. And the way our open office works is there's a few parts, but the main part is a public forum for debate. And the way it works is there'll be a web page, and people could basically go in, each resident in the district, log in, they could go for or against, they could leave their opinion in the space below. At the top of the page would be like a phone tally, so when people call in, it wouldn't just be like going into a black hole. People would actually be able to see everything that their government is doing. So that's transparency, and would be like a scoreboard for the district. The second part of it is, like, when I was an engineer over in China, my boss was actually here in the United States, so I sent him monthly reports. So that would be accountability. Every month, every House floor vote that I take, I would explain how I voted and why. I would explain all the bills that I introduced and why, and all the bills that I co-sponsored and why, and my budget would be transparent to the public.
Would you ever vote for something that you hadn't read from cover to cover?
No.
Even if it was 2,000 pages long?
Even if it was 1,900 or whatever it was.
Before I let you go, how difficult is it in 2009 to get on the ballot and to run a legitimate campaign without one of the two major political parties behind you?
Sure, and that's a good point. In Pennsylvania, the rules vary from state to state, but actually to run for U.S. Congress is easier than to run for U.S. House. You have to collect 2% of the winner's vote totals. So it's not impossible for me. What that means is 3,000 signatures. It's easy enough to do, and if you're out there thinking about possibly running for office, you really need to look into it.
There's a lot of people watching us now in Pennsylvania and elsewhere. How do they find you? How do they reach you? What's the website?
It's towneforcongress.com.
Spell Towne.
Yeah, exactly. TOWNE for Congress.com.
All right. Jake Towne, thanks very much. Thanks for joining us on Freedom Watch.
Thank you very much, Judge.